Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, as always, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by Dr. Adam Safron. He is research fellow at the Allen Discovery Institute at Tufts University, and he is also leading an interdisciplinary research program at the Institute for Advanced Consciousness Studies. And today we're going to talk about consciousness, intelligence, psychedelics, the self, and some other related topics. So, Adam, welcome to the show. It's a huge pleasure to everyone.
So happy to be talking with you.
So, before we get into specific topics, let me just ask you, because it seems to me that the research you do is very multidisciplinary and you have many different kinds of approaches. For some topics, you have, for example, developmental and evolutionary approaches. Then you also apply neurophenomenology or neuroscience plus phenomenology. And then you also have embodied cognition. So, what is the sort of framework that you adopt in your work when it comes to studying the mind? Exactly.
I guess some of my biggest influences would be it's like people like Nietzsche, George Lakoff, many others, but basically you might call it hierarchical perspectivism. And it's like, all models are wrong, some models are useful, and all analogies are wrong, some analogies are useful. And basically trying to like view different frameworks as different ways of getting purchase on this like crossword puzzle, each one constraining the other, each one having different constraints and affordances, which are non-overlapping. And so their strengths and weaknesses, you can kind of complement them. And the goal being to try to be as precise as possible, while also trying to be a little bit, but not too playful about it. So it's like, so this model, so here's one perspective and it gets you this far. Here's another perspective, it gets you this far. And they both converge in these ways and they don't converge in that ways. And just bootstrapping, filling in the crossword puzzle, moving around places where I have more or less purchase and trying to understand things. The other thing I would say would be something I call Marian biophenomenology, which is a terrible name, but basically, like David Mars said, like you can understand like any like cognitive system on these like three supervenient levels of analysis of like a functional computational level, like what is the system like trying to do, or the computations it performs, like what's its purpose, an implementation / mechanistic level of like the physics of how it gets it done, and some sort of like algorithmic abstraction layer in between. And so, so that I butchered it a little bit, but like roughly like this is this idea of like looking at these multiple compatible levels of analysis and cross-referencing across those and using those as sources of constraints, and then pointing those at the phenomena of interest and the explanandum you want to explain. So like so basically taking on multiple points of view from different frameworks, trying to stay faithful to them, but not too faithful, but faithful. And then and at any given point, recognizing that there are always multiple levels of analysis, which are all true in their own domains and their own scopes, and all wrong and true within their scopes, and then moving in and out based on what's most useful. It's kind of Eric Hole, I think, like talks about this well with some of his work on like causal emergence of it. Like it's like almost like what's the right coarse graining of a system. Like you have an aperture that you sort of move in and out until you get the most purchase and explanation. Anyway, so that was a lot, but like I don't know quite how I'd sum it up, but it's like whatever works while trying to be principled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So, and with that in mind, how do you approach the study of consciousness?
Using this, like taking on multiple points of view, zooming in and out at different coarse grainings, and considering multiple levels of analysis as potentially being supervenient or compatible or complementary. I basically have tried to, over the years, like just like everyone else, interested in my own consciousness, interested in theories of consciousness. So just reading widely And I did a apparently strange thing, which I find to be strange, that more people haven't done. Like, I'm meeting more people who have done it, but it's like surprisingly few. It's like, what if instead of just like taking like one perspective, saying this is the one, and then like digging in your heels and defending turf, the standard academic thing. What if you took the multiple perspectives and you tried to like cross-reference them and like use, and then bring in multiple points of view? You know, you have to be careful, obviously, because, you know, it's not, I don't want to go, you know, postmodern fully on this. It's like, you know, it's not everything is everything here. And you know, there's like really like, you can break the thing if you like relax assumptions and things like that. You can end up in BS territory if you're not careful in a hurry. So it's like, but that being said, what if like all of these brilliant people are actually all brilliant and actually seeing different sides of the elephant? And what if they should just talk to each other more and listen to each other more? Just saying. And so, like, for instance, when it came to consciousness, like, okay, there's this like group like integrated information theory. Like, this is very compelling in some respects. I don't know about that, but yeah. Amazingly brilliant people. Okay, here's like, you know, I have points of agreement, disagreement. The same thing like the global neuronal workspace crowd. Yep, absolutely. And I would say that for actually almost all the theories of consciousness. And, you know, I even get weird, you know, like I personally, for instance, like to go like most exotic, like I go all the way to like, you know, like orchestrated reduction and like quantum consciousness. Like, I personally don't believe in that, because like I think actually like Tegmark, I believe his proof that like, or his claims that like the thermal conditions aren't right. It isn't quantum physics giving rise to consciousness, but the idea that there's something deep about the quantum intuition when it comes to consciousness, and we should take it seriously, and this should be one of our like constraints on sense making, like a very qualified thumbs up. And then like, and so, but to like, the main focus though was be trying to focus on the theories that have the largest communities around them and have the strongest synergies, and then moving out from there, as the goal being basically a common like nexus of collaborations and sense making. So the big dogs of like integrated information theory, global neural workspace theory, it's like, you know, they're in this like adversarial collaboration, like who's right? It's like, guys, yes, you're not even using words the same way. So like no one listens to anyone. So it's like, so integrated information theory, they're talking about consciousness qua experience, qualia. They're talking about like, what would it take to have something like a qualia generator, like what it feels like and all the particulars of the fields. Global neural workspace theory, like sometimes it's like practically illusionist. They're talking about conscious access. They're talking about the ability to report on experience, to, you know, to have access, to manipulate, to be aware of it, you know. And then you're other things like, you know, things like metaverse. Like people are basically, I guess, engaging in something I call like the Humpty Dumpty fallacy. And this kind of brings us back to like Nietzsche, of like assuming that it's like one, like I think people are just confused about language. They think words are these like one-to-one mappings onto pointers in the Platonic forms, like it's just like gifted to us by God. And it's like, no, we had to like negotiate this. It's a hot mess, these language games we're playing. And but there's a, so basically, like the words have multiple meanings and we're getting confused, but like the way people tend to use language though is also a guide to how we ought to proceed. So for instance, I'm rambling, but like the idea, for instance, is like, okay, so it's important that like IIT is talking about phenomenal consciousness and GNWT is talking about conscious access. And so like they're talking, there's no need for them to even argue necessarily, because they're talking about different things of like consciousness potentially being understandable as this set of like phenomena that you can unpack at different levels. And you can use the same word, and the common use is informative, but the differences are also informative. So for instance, okay, rambling. So, but, okay, so something like the stream of experience, like basic, you might say like creature consciousness, or like the what it feels like being unpacked from moment to moment, the appearance of a lived world to you, of a appearance of a world to you from a point of view with a lived body at its center. Like Okay, that's one thing, and that's like the thing I tend to focus on. Like, what is it about a biological system understood in terms of its biophysics, in terms of um, and also in terms of principles from like machine learning and probability theory as an abstract understanding of them. What is it that might allow a physical system to give you basically a first-person ontology from a third, let you move from a third person to a first-person ontology, get a subjective point of view on a lived world, and specifically a world of experience. But then there's other ways that we will want to talk about consciousness, like for instance, like the phenomenologists say, like Husserlian time consciousness, like the specious present. That's an important explanatum too. There's also things like consciousness in terms of meta-awareness, and to be aware of your own experience and be self-reflexive. That's its own beast. And so it's basically like it makes sense that there's a common word that's pointing at all these things, but it's kind of like an onion that you can unpack at different levels, or like a tree that grows. So anyways, so the basic idea is what I do is I try to basically take all the theories seriously, cross-reference them, and keep cross-referencing them to basically create like a kind of Venn diagram / tree of how, and use and keep adding words while trying to use words as consistently as possible to say, here's roughly the range of phenomena of the things that are interesting to us about consciousness that we want to explain, and how can we do it? Okay.
So I mean, but you mentioned integrated information theory and global neuronal workspace theories of consciousness. But in your work, you also integrate them, or try to integrate them, or combine them with the free energy principle and the active inference framework.
Yes.
Right?
And so, yeah, so that brings to the table its own set of perspectives. For instance, on so for instance, like things like life-mind continuity, like the nature of like how intelligent systems are cybernetic systems and living systems, and like the minds that we think of now and like cognitive processes we think of, these are fruits of the tree of evolution, and they evolve and they develop. And so that's oftentimes neglected within the theories of consciousness. It's like, each one its own view on the elephant, but the developmentalist perspective, the evolutionist perspective. And so basically I focused on the free energy principle and active inference framework, IIT and GNWT as a starting like place of like bring these things together as basically like an inner kernel, and that I elaborate in a series of papers trying to basically enfold the various phenomena that different theorists talk about within this like inner kernel as a kind of minimal unifying model for understanding consciousness, and basically like a scaffolding which you could just keep layering on things, because we want to avoid like a postmodern like morass. It's like it has to be like a precise structure to work with. And so the idea was like focusing on these three theories and their different complementary features. So for instance, like the free energy principle has aspirations of being a theory of everything. So does IIT in a way, but they have differences. So it's like IIT has it's like the view of a system from its own point of view, and kind of its like intrinsic ontology. Well, the free energy principle is also a theory of everything, but it's more of like both intrinsic and a relational ontology. And they have like similar scopes, and then like basically say, okay, how do these theories talk to each other? How can they talk to each other? Where do they overlap? And so then global workspace theory entering specifically this idea that so cognitive systems of that have many of the properties that we would talk about in terms of consciousness, and some of the reasons we think brains are able to do the job of potentially of giving rise to something like consciousness. The idea is that the brain might have a certain type of structure or architecture which is particularly good for allowing for a particular kind of computation or emergent functioning to happen. So from the global workspace perspective, they talk about having a bunch of specialist systems which each has their own particular point of view on the world, and that these can come together for a whole that's greater than the sum of their parts in a workspace where they can become mutually legible to each other. And you can get this informational synergy by all these specialist processes can project or broadcast or can send their information to this like blackboard system. And these ideas originally came from computer science and like ways of like constructing like complex cognitive systems, but these then inspired theories of consciousness. And so global workspace theory, the idea is like that you're looking for a kind of architecture that allows you to have local specialist processes that can coordinate within this shared workspace and then give you a kind of informational synergy, a whole that's greater than some of its parts. Now, I don't think on its own this is an adequate theory of consciousness. I think it's like there's many aspects of neural functioning and like it engages very deeply, like for instance with like the neuroscience, the cognitive neuroscience literature, much more so than integrated information theory does. And so that's like the virtue of it is it's actually engaging with psychology and it's engaging with some computer science constructs. So that's global workspace theory. Integrated information theory brings something different to the table, and it gets us in a way closer to like the physics and the biophysics, and more in terms of like what kind of specific network properties might you need to be able to pull off the trick of a different type of informational synergy. So it's going to be hard to summarize both IAT and GNWT here, but it's like, and I have like a series of talks where I try to go into them, their different shapes, but like, you know, really the theories should just speak to themselves. And then what I've tried to do is basically, I claim these theories are actually legible to each other. And you just have to have like, and I try to basically provide a guide to this to say, okay, now like, let's just read the theorists and what they're saying. And now let's cross-reference it. Here's the mapping I think that works. And then we move from there. And so the free energy principle basically brings in something else in addition to basically, hard to explain, but the free energy principle, these ideas of like the Bayesian brain or perception as a kind of inference. And so like, you know, Anil Seth talks about this very well. It's like your conscious experience is a kind of grounded hallucination, or like, or it goes back to say like Helmholtz, or your perception is kind of inference to the best guess of the cause of what's there. Like if you actually look at the sense that you're getting, when I look out into the world, to the extent I'm not just like imagining things, but like when you look out into the world, like you only have a thumbnail arm's length and you move your hand around and that's all the actual data is coming in. But you're actually getting the experience, perhaps, of this more complete sensorium. So it seems like some sort of filling is happening. It doesn't seem like you're just getting this like really sparse thing. So the free energy principle basically works with these ideas, and it's in some ways it's I think these intuitions, you don't even need to talk about the free energy principle now, like where we're at in terms of things like you know, transformers, recurrent space models, like the current like place for generative AI. The idea is basically your experience, like this computation method, like what a consciousness generator would potentially be the entailment of some sort of generative model, or if we get into some devils and details, like LeCun might call it like an energy-based model, but still, the idea being that like the way that like, for instance, like a deep fake, like you're like filling in like pixel arrays in a screen, like to show you like an image. The idea that basically if you look at what the biophysics is doing and you find the right coarse graining to look at the right attracting structures, it will entail a kind of computation which could be thought of as the inversion of a generative model or the output of an energy-based model. But that basically like the same way like you look at these images that don't exist, like your experience is basically being computed by biophysics in that way. Instead of filling in a pixel array, you're filling in all of your modalities in different combinations at any given moment. And that basically you can say like, you know, you are a deep fake, like you are a strange loop deep fake being filled in all these different ways from moment to moment. And that basically what people might've been looking for the hard problem, and I think I have a couple options we might actually be quite close to, is some sort of computational description of biophysics where you say, yep, that there is the qualia generator. That there is the thing which can account for a stream of experience, what it feels like in all of the particular fields. And so the free energy principle I've worked with is in terms of like looking for this mapping to probability theory and machine learning, but you can also just go straight to probability theory and machine learning. You can say like, you know, we basically are in possession now, I believe, of a set of architectures and a lexicon, and we have like an algorithmic abstraction layer that's rich enough that I think like basically like the hard problem is it's on the ropes. I think it's just like a matter of like we just kind of like shove it around a bit, give it a hug, and then like have a few more conversations. I wouldn't be surprised actually if this like seemingly impenetrable mystery, if we just remembered that we had bodies, and then we found like what's the explanation we're looking to explain. Like for me, I'm trying to explain, what I focus on is why is it that a world appears to me with a live body at its center? And for me, that's the core explanation, but and the hard problem. And so the idea is these various theories were all pointing the way. And so right now I'm basically struggling with having like, I need to learn more about modern, like the latest advances in machine learning, but like, I think we're basically close to, I know it's a crazy claim, but like to basically nailing down the computational object that is the quality generator, and being able to say, here it is, in the language of like what transformers, recurrent space models, maybe some reservoir computing in there for kicks, some geometric deep learning. Like here's how it is done, that you could get something computationally that gives me a experience machine, and then here's how the biophysics does it, and now we account for the core features of our phenomenology, and it just depends, and just both like the generation of this lived body, move on to things like time consciousness. We then like include like richer dynamic perspectives and maybe get the hippocampal system into the loop. That's a whole other story. But like, and this like I think we're actually close to being able to talk about these things where the enduring problems of consciousness might just start to be sensible, and we can start to actually do a new kind of psychology and engineering and AI about it.
So you mentioned AI there. Would this approach to consciousness also apply to AI?
I believe so. And I believe actually the current debates about AI need to be informed by richer understandings of consciousness. And right now, I think a lot of the thought leaders in AI need to be more patient and read more widely on theories of consciousness, because right now it's sort of like they're engaging with like theories as they were. And like, so for instance, like Hinton, for instance, is just like a Dennettian. And I don't think that's adequate for actually like being able to reason about what a language model could do. It's just saying like Dennett was right about consciousness, nothing to see here, folks. Or for instance, like Bengio, like he's doing some like really interesting like global workspace ideas and like connecting that to dynamics. But even then it's like, I just think we need more details to be able to talk about this in the right way. And we're just not having the right kinds of conversations because no one's being patient enough. But the answer to your question is yes. I think actually, even though intelligence and consciousness are separable, in principle, in practice, they're not. And in practice, consciousness is, depending on how you want to define intelligence, is immensely powerful as a means of extending the capabilities of a cybernetic system, of an intelligent goal-seeking system. Like if you have like let's say you have like an agent in the world trying to realize its value, its semantic information for itself, and to basically have like this moment-to-moment estimation of a field of experience that has some things in the foreground and background based on like affordance potential and history of salience, and gives you like a compositionality where you can track things and assign things. And so, okay, this thing's here, this thing's there, this thing's more important, this thing's less important, cloud of affordances around. Like this is like just very useful for the being intelligent with respect to the goal of surviving or the goal of autonomy. And so like I currently like also am in conversation with like actually people from the US Air Force who are actually, they're looking to, you should probably talk to Kevin at some point. They're actually, he's less rambly than I am. They're looking to basically, and he's also a guest editor in these special issues that I'm organizing for Royal Society, on AI capabilities and the nature of also the nature of consciousness. But like they're looking to basically create artificial qualia for the purpose of creating next generation warfighters. Is like that's actually their mandate. And so dual use technologies, you know, it's scary stuff even, but the idea is like, is consciousness related to intelligence? Yes. Is it functional? Yes. The other way I would say is with respect to something like system 2 AI. Like, you know, again, we run into the issue of like multiple uses of consciousness and which ones we're talking about. Are we talking about phenomenal consciousness or conscious functions, and conscious functions of what kind? But this idea of like agents and what we're looking for in these systems, like we're looking for basically a system that can plan with depth into the future, explore counterfactuals in coherent ways, and being able to be like flexibly pivot and remember and like self-reflect. Like all these things would be related to some things like we might say as conscious functions in the sense of things like meta-awareness, metacognition. And so that's a whole other way in which consciousness studies, as diverse as it is relevant to AI. And so like I think so we'll get like oftentimes like, you know, a kind of like sneering dismissal like from people like Hinton of like the relationship between like consciousness and intelligence. And I think that's completely inappropriate. It's wrong. It's actually an embarrassment of riches. The problem is there's actually too many ways in which consciousness is related to intelligence. There's an important point there in that there is a separability and that you can get very high degrees of intelligence without consciousness. And that's the important point to be made. And the claim though I would make is that though if you're looking for something like artificial general intelligence, something like and we can get into like argue about what we mean by general, but still something that's like us, that can do the range of things we can do and more, a lifelong learner capable of navigating and guiding themselves and others in a world of this kind, inhabited by agents like us. I think we're going to need something like consciousness to bring that one home. And I think we might actually be, in some ways, closer than we think to getting there, but not with the current approaches.
Right. But do you think that AI would need to be embodied in any way if it were to develop consciousness, for example?
Yes. It would need at the very least a rich virtual body. And so there's right now, one of the companies I mentioned is actually starting to like simulate virtual embodiments for artificial life agents that are basically of increasing degrees of sophistication and giving them neural networks for rich like bodies modeled with rich physics, interoceptive states, exteroceptive states, and all of the ways that, like, for instance, bodies play into it. I have this one paper, forgive the title, the radically embodied cybernetic Bayesian brain from free energy to free will and back again. Right, I try to lay out like what I think like embodied cognition means. And so like one of the things is like I think actually the body provides a certain type. It has many features, but it allows for a certain type of learning curriculum that makes us extremely data efficient and allows us to engage in the process of structure learning of a world model, of a system world model, that if you bootstrap off of a valuing body, you get many things for free, and you actually need them to handle things like the frame problem, and to handle things like impoverished stimuli. Like it gives you. But yes, I personally think there's no sidestepping not just embodiment, but actually I think fairly rich embodiments, and embodiments that actually require certain types of informational closure with a certain kinds of tightness that basically situates you in the world as an actor, as a cause, among other causes, engaging with physics and being able to model the physics and the causation of your own body and the other bodies around you. And that's the kind of embodiment we need to actually have symbols be grounded and actually have systems that can actually have robust inference and don't like, we're all confabulation engines, but confabulations that don't like basically we trust in them up to the point. I mean, this is, I guess, always, but still, we trust them up to the point of catastrophe, where like they just don't make any sense at all. You're in like a cursed AI world. If they start just like Sora and these other things, like you go for long-term coherence, and they just start getting weird on you. And you know, it happens to us too, to some degrees, but actually like, but it doesn't. Like we know something's off when you look at like this Gen AI. Like it's impressive if you look at like these short snippets, but the ability to actually like get to yeah, the ability to like actually have a system that you could trust to account for the causes of the world, to model them, to predict them, to make decisions based on them in coherent ways. I think actually you need to have a system that is bootstrapped off of its body in a certain way. And so we're seeing, you know, I don't know how much of it's overhyped, but we're seeing this like revolution in robotics right now. You know, so just like, for instance, doing like multimodal AI, that's not going to be enough, I don't think. It has to be itself a cause in the world. It has to be its own acting agent. And so maybe robotics gets us there, but then the question is, how close are we to having robots of sufficient capabilities that they could actually give you like the data you need to basically engage in the kind of learning you would need to train up a system world model. And so one of the companies I'm looking into is actually an applied AI company for elder care. And there's an interest in going into robotics and also developmental robotics and actually like exploring that. But this other company that is getting going is it's an A-Life AI simulation platform and a video game company and like scientific benchmarking like place-based system that basically creating these AI agents of increasing sophistication where they actually have rich bodies, but they're in a 2D environment. And so it's like easy to implement them, but you can still get like a lot of the physics and principles going. And it's a way of doing it in a way that's like compute efficient, but still like, it's not clear how far you can get with it. We're also exploring like 3D options, but basically like seeing how far we can get with basically rich virtual embodiments that actually get the richness of the kinds of bodies that we have. Right, so.
So let me just change topics now because I am also looking at the time. So tell us about the work you've been doing on psychedelics, how it relates to your other research interests, and I mean, start by telling us what psychedelics are.
So, again, I'll go. I might verge a little postmodern in terms of it's always like which psychedelic in which context, and so like part of the work is like what's the diversity range of like psychedelic phenomena, but still the through line also among all the psychedelics, or rather the clustering like classic psychedelics, psilocybin, LSD, the ones that tend to generate like mystic experiences reliably of a kind that for many people are life transformative. So those I've done most of my work so far focusing on that class of psychedelics and their mechanisms for how they might work. And I just published a paper, ALBIS, or Altered Beliefs Under Psychedelics. It's kind of a response paper to an earlier theory called Rebus, Relaxed Beliefs Under Psychedelics by Robin Carhart Harris and Carl Friston. And it's basically trying to take on those ideas and basically iterate on them and like embed them in like basically apply more principles from basically add in more details to try to make a more comprehensive theory. But for psychedelics, though, like in terms of like, I guess in terms of the use of language, is some what it says in the tin of like psychedelic or mind manifesting. So like there's these compounds that allow when they're ingested or produced endogenously in some way, you know, whether like heavy breathing, potentially even like endogenous DMT, basically alters your consciousness, your experience in a way that's notable. And oftentimes it's not just your what is altered about your consciousness. Usually it's both like things like not just like the dreamlike character of it, the vividness, the detail, but also your sense of self and the relationship to world. And so basically a changing in the nature of your qualia, like in terms of like, usually, not always, but like an increasing of like vividness and texturing and detail. Things are manifesting more readily, and an alteration of yourself and relation to the world. That seems to be like one of the core things that like makes them so powerful. It's like you're experiencing something very intensely, but you are different, and now everything's different. And so now that's like part of how it's like so meaningful to people and so beautiful to people, and such an opportunity is you have this thing which can change, which can like basically anneal you or canalize you differently. Like it's like, and so there's some models like an opening of a critical window, and it can also just or also just in the moment though, it can let you like by like cranking like by turbocharging the turbo code, by like cranking the gas on consciousness, you can like reach states that like you couldn't reach otherwise, and have like peak experiences and flow experiences you might not have had otherwise. And this seems to be like the range of things we're trying to account for when we're trying to account for psychedelics. And so in the papers I've been working on over the years, I've been trying to say, okay, using these like multiple perspectival, informed by like biology and computer science approaches, how can we make sense of these range of phenomena? What neural systems do we have to look to? What computational principles do we need? And so that would be the shape of that.
Mhm. But do we have a good understanding of their mechanisms of action in the brain, and do we understand neuroscientifically how they produce, for example, mystic experiences and the other kinds of mental experiences that are a result of their consumption?
I guess it depends like how ambitious we are and like how much we're trying to explain. So it's like, and also I guess like it's like the question "we" is interesting. I actually like, I feel like academia is like, it's failed so much on its own terms, and like we're all just like talking past each other so much, and no one's listening to each other enough. Like I don't even know if there's a "we." Like even me, like for instance, like getting ready for this interview, I was like, I had to like reread my own papers to be like, wait, which thing do we have to dig into now? So, but still, I think it's like, um, uh, I think like you're getting at like which is what I love about your like, you always get the deepest question, and I think we can get at some aspects of missed experiences to some degree. How satisfying it is, I'm not sure, but yeah. So how close are we to that? So basically, I give it my best shot in this like recent paper that just came out in Neuroscience of Consciousness of like, I'm not claiming to have like accounted for all the things, but I was like, okay, so like, so let's say like we tried like really freaking hard for a long time. Here's what it might look like to try to make a dent in it. And so like I do like approach it like, so like the dreamlike character, the alterations of selfhood, what it's like with like different like levels of substance ingestion and why, based on like different like neuroscientific details, and seeing if a coherent account could be there. But you have to unfold details, like it's a long conversation, and it has to be like you have to talk about things like, okay, is there a common cortical algorithm or not? Like, going back to Mountcastle and Jeff Hawkins and all these ideas of like, prediction memory frameworks, and then, hierarchical predictive coding. Okay. And now how might psychedelics impact that? And also how might we need to complexify that story? Because that's not an account of subjective experience. So now we need to start to unfold theories of consciousness. And wait, now we're talking about, psychedelic cognition and like the way, like the psychotomimetic paradigm, and the ways in which like to be like a trend, like one of the interests in psychedelics, like I guess back in the 50s, was like giving psychiatrists more like empathy for like their psychotic patients. And so this like transient psychosis quality. Okay, so now we're talking about cognition. So now we're not just talking about quality generators. We're talking about things like mental time travel, the nature of subjective time, the nature of like imagination, and it's your ability to distinguish imagination from reality. And then, and so now you have to do like really complex systems neuroscience, and then it just gets, and so I do my best, like in this paper, to like try to account for such things, and I had to leave a lot on the cutting room floor. But I think we are actually quite close. I think it's I don't know if it's satisfying enough for like a meal. You know, I want more, but it's like enough. It's like, yeah, maybe, and you keep going. Like I wouldn't say like we're at like fully satisfying explanations. And I also like always feel like I always feel actually kind of like weird about it because it's like approaching it with the scientific instrument. I feel like it's like there's like a duty to do so because it's like, you know, we have to get these details right because like these are medical interventions. This is like these are deep threads into like microscopes for mind. Like, you know, like that was part of like the psychedelic center at Hopkins. Like the hope was we would, you know, understand the secrets of consciousness by studying psychedelics. Like, and I think there is something there to it in terms of like in like constructing these theories. They had to like call shots and like it really like a lot of things are revealed like core like cruxes and issues. But like also there's like an element of like humanity and spirit and like verbal overshadowing and like scientism and like overreaching. And it's like there's also a sense in which these are sacred things to people and you know and like very meaningful, and it's like the way you talk about them also matters. I don't know, so it's like yeah, they're not like, you know, it's like the theories are not like possessions to like, you know, like put on your shelf and be like, ah, I did it. It's like anyway. So I think progress is being made by us. More progress will be made by us if we listen to each other better. Um, and I think there's some satisfaction, but I continue to be dissatisfied. So I'm sorry, this was
Okay, then let me ask you a different kind of question. What are the modern applications of psychedelics?
it seems like the main places where they're being explored at the moment primarily would be, I guess, you know, on the streets, in the homes, in the underground is like where most of it's happening. It's just everyone using their own, you know, parties. But then um, I guess the next place to mention, just I guess maybe as a matter of principle, would be, you know, the deep history of psychedelics and things like connections to like shamanism and places where like it's still involved in people's cultures. Like I was on a ayahuasca retreat not too long ago at this place called the Temple of Way of Light, and they try to like preserve like the tradition of psychedelics. And man, that was rough. Um, there was I'm still recovering. Um, there was might be part of why this is a slightly chaotic interview. I'm sorry. Um, the uh, there's also the ways in which, you know, I would argue, I guess the next one also is a matter of principle. I'm working on like a paper with Sue Carter on trying to like explore like endogenous psychedelic states, and we're exploring whether like, for instance, like connections between social peptide and psychedelic mechanisms, with the idea that basically sex, orgasm, birthing, like these might have in some senses been like the original psychedelic states. Maybe also like near-death experiences. Um, I just don't know, like, if you got to that point, like, could you have enough like selective pressure from that as a source? Because like in nature, if like you were almost dead, were you probably dead? But still, you know, it's not a really, it's not a contest, but it is like near-death experiences. I just don't know quite how to think about them as like how much selection came from that. But it's like, let's say you almost died, or like you came close. That might be, or let's say you're coming close. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But basically, um, psychedelics, I would say, like we enter into psychedelic states almost in like a stoned ape theory. And I'm working on a paper on that with Matt Johnson of like part of human uniqueness is like we are like a psychedelic ape, and we're moving in and out of like these shamanic states to different degrees, maybe including things like, you know, hyperventilation, carbon dioxide agonizes the 5-HT2A receptor or potentiates it, endogenous DMT, or just like states of neural synchrony, moving in and out of like alterations of consciousness, self-consciousness. And then finally, I will say, I don't want to I'll say medicine, just because like the state of it is rough. So like places like Hopkins, like they're doing great work in terms of like these interventions potentially can like save people's lives. Like you give someone a mystic experience, and like it'll be one of the like top five most meaningful experiences in a person's life, and it could like turn things around, overcoming addiction, overcoming like depression, those things that like have plagued them as like born again experiences. And And so, I don't want to I just put it last because like these other things I think are kind of like too like they're weird and neglected, and I think they provide an important backstory. But anyways, but there's an immense promise there. I guess the reason I might put it last is I feel like that endeavor is doing just fine on its own, and might I think maybe could benefit from getting a little bit weirder, and maybe incorporating like things like self-compassion and other elements in terms of like the way they approach the questions. And also they have an issue of like they don't have a business model for scaling it, because like this it's just like so hard to like it costs so much to do like an 8-hour like psilocybin session to have like a doctor on call. Like I was trying to do a study at one point, and I was like, I had this like $900,000 grant. I was like, I've never seen so much money. And I was like, that's not pilot data. It was like nothing. Anyway, so how do you actually scale this to like heal people? Like what's the model of healing? So you could do like a group therapy thing and maybe like scale it that way. There's some interesting things though happening with short-acting psychedelic compounds that people are engineering that might change that. So it's like someone could have like an MDMA like ecstasy like thing, and like it lasts only for an hour, and then like maybe like the mainstream medicine effort will like be more relevant to helping more people. But right now it's kind of like it's very interesting, promising, cutting edge research happening in this medical context. And I guess the final one, which is something I'm working on, is this. I'm trying to basically, this actually is going to relate to the video game project, is something I call psychedelic machine learning, which I know sounds like it's like a sensational thing, but it's not. The idea is like if part of what makes systems intelligent, well, one, if like part of like ways of interpreting psychedelics is like changing of states of consciousness and if self and consciousness are both functional, then you can think of psychedelic mechanisms as, in cybernetic terms, as order parameters, control parameters. They have functional significances. And so if you talk about like psychedelics modifying you to imagine differently, to dream differently, like so for instance, like with respect to like a driverless car, you're going to change lanes. You do like a rollout into the future of like, what would happen if I switch lanes? How vivid is that imagining? How creative do you get? Or like when you take it back to the Tesla dojo and you're looking for like the edge cases and you're doing the dreaming, like what's the nature of the dreaming? How weird do you get? And so the idea is like psychedelics basically in multiple ways can inform machine learning, both through neuro AI and through some of the problems that are addressed in AI, like making for flexible learning, imaginative systems, parameterizing simulation / like offline learning, and then potentially being like a virtuous cycle where this machine learning interpretation of psychedelics actually gives you a coherent way of talking about it, which I guess in a way brings us full spiral back to like the approach to consciousness, is this idea of going for like a virtuous cycle. Like Demis Hassabis actually talked about this really well in a 2017 paper of a virtuous cycle between like neuroscience and machine learning, of like each one informing the other and keeping you grounded. So it's like you can do better neuroscience from like the machine learning lens, and then the machine learning lens, and then like the neuroscience lens like gives you ideas for machine learning. And so same thing, like psychedelic machine learning, I think there's basically an academic field that's about to take root there. And I'm working with some people to make that happen. Institute for Advanced Consciousness Studies, we have a paper coming out. And also going to actually try to be, it's going to be part of the research. So for instance, these A-life creatures, like giving them psychedelics. One more thing, Mike Levin. Mike Levin, he also is doing really interesting work with like generalized psychedelics in ways that they can parameterize morphogenesis, like the development of like the phenotype and the morphotype as a kind of inference process, and then like what happens when you like give drugs to the embryo. And so there's all sorts of like psychedelics. It's like it's too rich, like all the ways like it applies to like the mind sciences. It's like the question is, the problem I guess I generally have is like, where do you begin to have like a coherent conversation about this, and how can like we all be comfortable with getting as weird as we need to be to actually talk to the weirdness that is nature and ourselves.
Yeah, I understand. So let me ask you one last question at a certain point.
Understands. I think you might be the only person who understands.
Well, I don't think so. So, and anyway, let me ask you one last question
You
then.
understand better than I do, I think. Like from all these conversations you've been having, like you think I can tell you some things. Like,
Yeah. Okay. So at a certain point there, you mentioned the self. So do psychedelic experiences relate to the self in any way? And what is the self really?
so yeah, I would place probably if you're looking for a like unifying definition of psychedelics, not in terms of like what it is that's manifesting in mind differently that makes us like find them notable. Um, uh, Changing in the quality of consciousness and particularly self-consciousness. And so like, uh, and this being part of what makes these experiences particularly notable in their the difference from other types of experiences makes them meaningful in the ways they are and potential to be transformative. And so I guess I would think of the self. I actually have a series of papers that just came out, preprints. Collaborator, grad student at Indiana University, Victoria Klamai, on actually getting into like the nature of selfhood with respect to like biotic systems and AI. And we have like a series of 3 papers digging into specifically this issue of how ought we think of selfhood. But once again, it's using the method. I like almost all the ways I've seen selfhood talked about. I like Dennett when he says it's a center of narrative gravity. I like it like when people talk about like minimal embodied selfhood. I like it when like people like Jordan Peterson and Colin DeYoung talk about selves as like cybernetic controllers and like types of data structures. Um, I also like mystic perspectives on selves that consider the ways that selves also have to be non-self. Although I have actually a book chapter coming out where I actually take some aim at that, like pushing back against people like Sam Harris, because I think actually self-illusionism is wrong and dangerous. Selves are quite real. They're terrifyingly real. They're also empty, but they're also real. And so, like, I think that's what Buddhists would generally say, actually. Um, the but there's some interesting work. So for instance, there's one person you might want to talk to, has a paper on selfos, which I think you'll find interesting in terms of like a through line. I invited them, actually have to reach out to them as like part of this collections of Royal System organizing. And they're also, I think, collaborating with Mike. And it's basically generalizations of the default mode network across scales and actually finding like analogs of it going like in the Hydra and actually potentially go, and other systems like even like plants or like potentially even individual cells, but a kind of like um, uh, a metastable attracting structure, uh, metastable in terms of being at the edge of chaos or like poised at criticality that allows basically uh, the system to you'll have like a sensory motor interface and then this basically and some sort of inner salience type network, some sort of evaluator of how good or bad it is for the conditions of life, and then intermeeting within them this structure of a model of the system and its relationship to the world. And it has certain properties usually they're interesting, like it's seems to be important for it to be like flexible but not too flexible, at the edge of chaos, poised, has properties of self-organized criticality. And so one of the things that psychedelics do potentially is like they disrupt, among many things, is the default mode network and allow for different types of creative reconfigurations. Change the nature of the cybernetic control allows you to break up the old regime and explore new ones. And so if you're looking at things like generalized psychedelics, basically for all systems, like the self of the system, the core features of it, there's like some attractor network that has the ability to autopoetically reconstitute itself through its inaction, and that this system that it can be potentially has connections to, like, it basically gives it coherence across time as and allows like the past to inform the future for adaptive behavior, and that this structure, this attracting structure, it can be too loose or it can be too rigid. So like right now, for instance, coming off my ayahuasca retreat, it might be a little too loose right now, but like it could also be too rigid in terms of you might be stuck in like a psychotic depressive state, or just like a loveless job or a loveless marriage, like a nihilism, despair, or and so you can just be like locked into this perception box in this one frame of things. And so but for any system, it seems like there's this essential inner attracting structure that defines it, that allows you to say there's a system there, and that gives it coherence, gives it a conatus, if you will, or allows it to have intention, allows it to like basically buffer entropy and be a cause in the world, be a difference maker, and not just get like wiped out by the second law and become maximally probable and ground up in the meat grind of existence, like something that it's something that resists and climbs gradients, but also gives and integrates. Right. So what is the self? It's like so many things, and there's like it's just like, but there's also a through line, and I think language is both like confusing and wise in terms of like there's a reason we have these common like words for these different things, and it's just like we need just to add a couple more words when we're talking, because like, okay, which do we mean in which context? And what's the interrelation of these different senses for the different sides of the elephant? And so, what is self? What is consciousness? What is intelligence? What is, for all of them, that's kind of like that same sort of move, I'd say, is needed. But so I'm going meta, though, instead of answering your question. So
yeah, but look, if people are interested, where can they find your work on the internet?
So if they're interested, I have a poorly curated YouTube channel that has a lot of my workout videos, or where I pray and work out my issues. And I have but I also have like a lot of conversations with different people. I'm about to put up some new playlists there of like different like interviews I've given, but I guess maybe my Google Scholar would be a good place to go, or I use Facebook as like a kind of science journal, and I have like this weird memory palace in there. And I sometimes do the same thing with Twitter. And I guess I'm starting to use LinkedIn. So, I guess I have a website now, and email also works. Via that website, there's a submission form, but happy to talk to people. Yeah, so probably my website that's getting polished, and those other standard places that people go to find out about people. They're all fine. So.
Okay, great. So I'll be leaving some links to that in the description of the interview. And Adam, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. It's been fun to talk to you.
Thank you so much. And
Hi guys, thank you for watching this interview until the end. If you liked it, please share it, leave a like and hit the subscription button. This show is brought to you by Enlights, Learning and Development Done Differently. Check their website at enlights.com, and also please consider supporting the show on Patreon or PayPal. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my main patrons and PayPal supporters: Per Ergo Larsen, Jerry Mullerens, Frederick Sunda, Bernardo Seixas, Olaf Alex, Adam Kessel, Matthew Whittingford, Arno Wolf, Tim Hollis, Eric Alenia, John Connors, Philip Forrest Connolly, Dan Demetri, Robert Windiger, Rui Inácio, Zup, Marco Neves, Colin Holbrook, Phil Kavanagh, Mikkel Stormir, Samuel André, Francis Ford, Tiago Nunes, Fergal Cossen, Hal Herzog, Nuno Machado, Jonathan Librant, João Linhares, Stantantia, Samuel Correia, Eric Hines, Mark Smith, João Eira, Tom Hummel, Sardas France, David Sloan Wilson, Yacila Dez Araújo, Romain Roach, Diego Londoño Correia, Yannick Punter, Dana Rusmani, Charlotte Bliss, Nicole Barbaro, Adam Hunt, Pavlo Stasevski, Nelek Bach, Guy Madison, Gary G. Alman, Sam Afzal, Adrian Yeager, Paul Tolentino, João Barbosa, Julian Price, Edward Hall, Edin Bronner, Douglas Fry, Franca Bortolotti, Gabriel Ponce Cortez, Ursula Litsky, Scott, Zachary Fish, Tim Duffy, Sonny Smith, John Wiseman, Daniel Friedman, William Buckner, Paul George Arnaud, Luke Loaki, Georgios Theophanes, Chris Williamson, Peter Wolozin, David Williams, Diogo Costa, Anton Erickson, Charles Murray, Alex Shaw, Maury Martinez, Coralie Chevalier, Bangalore Atheists, Larry Dealey Jr., Old Erringbone, Sterry, Michael Bailey, Dan Sperber, Robert Grassi, Igor N., Jeff McMahon, Jake Zool, Barnabas Radix, Mark Campbell, Thomas Dovner, Luke Nissen, Chris Story, Kimberly Johnson, Benjamin Galbert, Jessica Nowicki, Linda Brandon, Nicholas Carlson, Ismael Benzliman, George Coriatis, Valentin Steinman, Per Crowley, Kate Van Goller, Alexander Hubbard, Liam Dunaway, BR, Masood Ali Mohammadi, Perpendicular, Jonas Hertner, Ursula Goodenough, Gregory Hastings, David Pinsoff, Sean Nelson, Mike Lavigne, and Jos Necht. A special thanks to my producers, Isar Webb, Jim Frank, Lucas Stafiniak, Tom Vanagdam, Bernard Ugni, Curtis Dixon, Benedict Mueller, Thomas Trumbull, Catherine and Patrick Tobin, John Carlo Montenegro, Alnick Ortiz, and Nick Golden, and to my executive producers, Matthew Lavender, Sergio Quadriano, Bogdan Kanivets, and Rosie. Thank you for all.